Hello and welcome to the Mindful Knits Learn to Knit a Chunky Beanie knitting tutorial. In this tutorial we'll be knitting a chunky beanie in an adult size. This tutorial accompanies our Learn to Knit kit, Chunky Beanie Edition. This kit comes with 2 balls of 100% acrylic chunky yarn. Each ball is 100 grams each. One 12mm circular knitting needle, one plastic yarn needle for weaving in ends, which we'll do at the end. You'll also need a pair of scissors, a measuring tape, which is optional, and a small hair tie. If you'd like to create a hat in a baby or child size, we'll have modifications to the pattern in the description box below. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's start by unraveling or unwrapping our first ball of yarn and unraveling the amount of yarn that we'll need to get the project started. You need to unravel approximately 90 inches, or if you don't have a measuring tape, approximately 6 forearm lengths of yarn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now we're going to make a slip knot. A slip knot is the first loop we put on our needle. I'm going to do this a couple of times, so don't worry. You'll be able to follow along. This is what a slip knot looks like. It's pretty easy to unravel. What you do is you make a loop with the yarn, push yarn through the back of the loop, and pull up. That's a slip knot. Let's do it one more time. Make a loop with the yarn, push yarn through the back of that loop, and pull up. Now you can grab your circular knitting needles. You might have to untie it from the packaging, and place the slip knot on your right needle. A little bit of vocab. There's 2 yarns coming off your needle. The one that isn't connected to the yarn ball is called your tail, and the one that is called your working yarn. We're now going to establish our foundational row by a process called casting on. I'll do this a couple times, don't worry. You're going to grab your yarn, separate it with your forefinger and thumb, pull your needle down to make this Y shape. Grab your yarn, separate with the forefinger thumb, pull needle down, and now you're going to put the yarn needle under the thumb loop and over the forefinger loop and pull it through and pull to tighten, but don't tighten too much. You don't want it to become too tight. Again, I know this can be confusing, but just follow along and replay if you need to. Create the Y, under thumb, over forefinger, pull to tighten. We'll keep doing it a couple more times. So each time we do this, it's called casting on a stitch. And in total, we want to do this 33 times. Separate, under thumb, over forefinger, pull through, tighten. Once you do it 5, 10 times, you'll get used to it. As you start accumulating stitches on your right needle, you can push them down to the remainder of your circular needle so that they don't bunch up on the right needle. Finish up your 33 stitches and we'll meet back here. Now we should have 34 stitches total, including the slip knot at the very beginning, so go ahead and count. You should count 34, so your 33 cast-ons plus your slip knot. Now place your hair tie on the right needle to use as a stitch marker to tell us when our row ends. Make sure all of your stitches are right side up, nothing is twisted in our foundational row as we prepare to begin. For our first row, we're going to join our knitting project so that it makes a round, and then do a knit 1 purl 1 pattern for this first row. To knit a stitch, we're going to place our right needle through the first stitch in our left needle, and then the working yarn, which is behind our needle, we're going to wrap around our right needle And this will create a sort of loop, which will pull through that first stitch and then pull that first stitch off our left needle. There's our first knit stitch, congrats! Now we're going to do a purl by bringing our working yarn to the front of our needle, pushing our needle through the front of the first stitch on our left needle, wrapping it around our right needle, which creates a loop, pulling that loop through that first stitch, and then dropping that first stitch off the left needle. That's your first purl. Now we're going to knit again. Put the yarn at the back, push the right needle through that first stitch, wrap it around to create the loop, pull through, and drop off the stitch. Bring the yarn to the front for our purl, push through, make the loop, pull the loop through, drop that stitch off. You might want to go back and re-watch that a couple of times, but those are really the two building blocks of knitting, the purl stitch and the knit stitch. And once you've mastered those, there's really nothing you can't do in the knitting world. Here's a quick visual guide on what a purl and a knit look like, so you know which one should come next. A purl kind of creates that beaded look, while a knit creates a V look. So you can see our last stitch is that V kind of knit stitch, so I know my next stitch needs to be a purl, which is why I bring my yarn to the front. So at any point, if you forget, where you are in your knit purl alternation, just check out what is the shape of that previous stitch. Is it kind of that beaded purl look, or is it the knit V? That should indicate which one you have to do next. What we're doing here by doing a knit and purl alternation is creating a rib stitch. And once we do a couple of rows of this, we're going to do 4 total, you'll see a very familiar pattern emerge. Now we've approached the end of our row, so we simply transfer our stitch marker over to our right needle. And this is where, if you want to keep track, you can write down that you've completed 1 knit 1 purl 1 row and follow along with the pattern in the description. Now the first stitch of our new row should be we start off again with the knit purl, so you do a knit, you do a purl, knit, purl, and keep going. So we're going to do round 2 now. Now we're approaching the end of row 2, and you might start seeing, if you look back at your work, a rib pattern emerge, something that might look familiar from sweaters or beanies you've worn. It's pretty cool. You did that. Let's go ahead and finish out our row and finish 2 more rows just like this. Continue with the knit 1 purl 1 pattern. Here we are just finishing up our knit 1 purl 1 row 4. All right, 4 rows of knit 1 purl 1 or rib stitch complete. Let's look back and admire our work thus far. This is creating a nice little ribbed cuff-like beginning portion of our hat, so the hat stays nice and snug around our ears. Now comes the easy part. For the remainder of the hat, you're just going to do a knit stitch. Knit all the way through the row for 16 more rows. So we've done 4 rows of knit 1 purl 1. Now we're just going to knit all the way around for 16 rows. A little knitting tip. Thus far we've actually been using a style of knitting called English knitting, where we're throwing the yarn over the needle with our right hand. But I'd like to show you a way of knitting if you feel like you've mastered this English style and want to attempt a faster style of knitting. called continental knitting. In this style of knitting, you actually hold the yarn, the working yarn, in your left hand. So see, I'm going to transfer the yarn over to my left hand and actually tension it with my left hand, kind of drape it over my forefinger, and pull the yarn through as I knit. So this is something that definitely takes practice. But this is continental knitting, and for knitters who are experienced and want to go a little faster, they prefer this method. So you can give it a try, holding the yarn in your left hand, tensioning it with your fingers. But if it doesn't suit you, feel free to go back to the original way that we learned, which is this way, taking the yarn in your right hand and throwing it over the right needle in this English method. Now, as you continue knitting, you'll notice that your first yarn ball is kind of dwindling. And here I am after a couple of rows, and I'm reaching the end of my first yarn ball. So as you are knitting and you approach approximately have 10 inches left of your yarn ball, that's when you want to stop, and we want to connect in our new yarn ball. So when we have about 10 inches left, go ahead and stop using that yarn and grab your second yarn ball. Unwrap the label of your yarn ball and unravel about 10 inches of this new yarn ball. Pull the remainder from your first yarn ball into the hat to get it out of the way. Now we're going to take our new yarn and simply start knitting with it. We'll take care of these loose ends at the very end of our project. So pull in that new yarn ball's kind of tail piece, what we'll call it, also through the hat, and begin knitting by looping the working yarn around our right needle. Make sure those two little tails are kind of out of the way. We want to make sure we're only working with the working yarn. Now we have these two little stragglers that you want to be mindful of. Go ahead and continue knitting until you hit 20 rows. Keep going and we'll meet back here once you approach the end of your 20th row. All right, welcome back. We're just finishing up row 20. Just a few more stitches. You're welcome to make it longer if you'd like. You can put it on your head and see if you want to make it longer, but between 20 and 23 rows is probably good enough. You can take off your stitch marker. And now I would cut approximately 2 feet or 2 forearm lengths of yarn. So cut about 24 inches of a tail and save your remaining yarn. We're going to use this in case you would like to add a pom-pom to your hat. We're going to use up all of that remaining yarn, so nothing will go to waste. Now is the really fun part. Grab your blue plastic yarn needle, also called a tapestry needle, and weave your yarn through the head of that needle. It is a little tricky, admittedly, but it's possible, as you can see. Then you're going to weave that plastic needle through all of the live stitches. So starting from your left needle, from stitch 1 all the way through all 34 stitches, you're going to weave your tapestry needle through that. As you can see, here's the first one. I'm just weaving it through and pulling it off the left needle. Just be careful that none of your stitches come off your right side needle. And to be safe, I just push them all down because eventually they're all going to come off the left side. So go ahead and make your way through all of those stitches. And as always, we'll meet you here toward the end of the row. Welcome back. We're just weaving the needle through our last 2 stitches. And once you've weaved it through the last stitch and pull your yarn all the way through, now the very satisfying part, pull your yarn so that the top of the hat scrunches up to the middle, and voila! So beautiful, you made a hat. I don't know about you, but this is the most satisfying feeling ever when you see your completed work. Well, not quite completed, but it actually looks like a hat. So now we're going to do the part that's not so fun, called weaving in our loose ends. So first of all, take your yarn or needle and weave that remaining yarn through the top of the hat to the inside. And then turn the hat inside out. And you'll see all those extra little tails that I promised we would get rid of at the end of the project. That's what we're going to do now. It's called weaving in loose ends. It's usually not anyone's favorite part of the project, but again, once we complete this, it'll be very satisfying. Let's start with the end, which was the tail when we initially cast on our project. It's that very first loose end that we have. Start by threading your needle, and typically there's no like extremely right or wrong way to do this. The method I prefer is simply weaving the yarn through 5 or so stitches in the back of the hat, and then weaving 3 or so stitches in the opposite direction and tying a knot. So we're just really, there's no precise way to do this, just through some of the stitches in the back of the hat, we're just weaving our yarn through. There's no way to be perfect about this because it's just making sure your yarn is nice and fixed and doesn't budge as you wear it, when you wash it. So after weaving our yarn through about 5 of our little knit stitches, I'm now weaving backwards 3 stitches, and then I'm gonna make a little loop and thread the yarn through that loop to create a little knot. Make it really tight. As you can see, if you flip it over, you can't tell at all that you've weaved anything in, and then I snip off that extra yarn. The second set of loose ends are those 2 tails from when we transitioned from one ball of yarn to the next. So first what I'll do is I'm actually going to tie those 2 together 3 times to create like a really nice knot. Because our yarn is so thick and our project is so chunky, this is such a forgiving project. None of this will show in the front of your project. So if you're lazy like me, I would have just snipped off after creating that knot. But since this is being recorded for all of eternity, I'll take the extra step of weaving in both of those ends as well. So again, I'm just weaving the yarn through about 5 stitches one way, and then weaving backward about 3 stitches the reverse direction. I'm not being precise about it. I'm not worried about this really showing on the other side. If we had a thinner yarn, a more delicate project, there'd be a much more precise way to do this perhaps, but that's the beauty of this beginner's like learn to knit kit. We don't have to be so precise. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make the loop and make a knot. and then just tight, 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 and cut it. Same thing with the other loose end. I'm going to speed this one up so we don't waste too much time. All right, so the final loose end that we have is this one, this top tail. If you don't want a pom-pom on your hat, you can weave that in, cut it off, and boom, you have a finished project. However, if you do want a pom-pom, save that loose end. We'll use it to fix the pom-pom to the hat. So now we're going to go ahead and make a pom-pom. You can put your hat aside, and what you'll need to make the pom-pom is that remaining extra yarn that you had. We're going to use up all of it. You'll need some scissors, and you'll need a surface or with some sort of covering because this is going to get messy. So grab that extra yarn and wrap it around your hand. Wrap it around your hand like so. Keep wrapping, keep wrapping. All the way till you have about a foot of yarn left, about 12 inches of yarn left. And cut. This is where it gets tricky, so if you have someone around to help you, this would be a good time to call them, but you can do this solo as well. We're gonna tie a knot around this wrapped yarn right in the middle. So I'm tying it to kind of cut it in half. So really, really, really tight. Pull, and then I'm gonna wrap that yarn around and tie it on the other side super tight, like as tight as you possibly can. And then tie it one more time so that you have a knot on that side. Essentially, you can think of it like a really tight belt. We really want to keep that in place, and you want to make sure that you do not cut that off because that's holding our pom-pom together. Then you're going to grab your scissors and cut through the top and the bottom set of loops that's been formed. So cut through all of those loops. Again, be very careful that you don't cut that belt. Cut the loops on the bottom. You might have to dig around, make sure you get all the loops. And it's going to look really ugly and really crazy initially. Don't worry. That's going to get fixed after a lot of pom-pom snipping. So we finished the bottom half. Let's cut through the loops on the top half. And you can see my loops are a little uneven. It's okay. Again, very forgiving project. Pom-poms don't have to be perfect. That's what makes them so amazing. So I'm cutting through all the loops. And now we have this really big, scraggly, it doesn't even look like a ball. But what you're going to do is after you've found all the loops, you've made sure you cut through them, now you're just going to cut so that it looks spherical. This is where when I said it gets messy, it gets very messy. So you can either do this on top of a trash can, or here I'm doing it on top of a tablecloth. But just go around the circumference of this object and just cut. Keep cutting until you start making a spherical shape. Again, I'm kind of weird, so I find this extremely satisfying and fun. And here I'm speeding it up for you. There's no right or wrong way. Another reason I love this project, there's really no perfect way to make a pom-pom, but I just grab sections and even out the length of all the yarn, and that typically gets me into somewhat of a spherical shape. Now that we're getting to somewhat of a sphere pom-pom looking shape, I think I'm happy. A couple more snips. And now we can move all of that pom-pom mess out of the way because we're ready for the final step. As you can see, I never managed to really get rid of the pom-pom mess, but it's okay. It gives a nice background effect. Let's bring back our hat, and now we're going to affix the pom-pom to the top of our hat, making it look like a very traditional classic hat. Go ahead and grab your yarn needle again and weave it through the tail, the remaining tail from when we scrunched up the top of our hat. Now this is a little bit hard to explain verbally, but here's my attempt. I want to anchor this pom-pom in 4 places to the top of the hat. So if we think of the top center of the hat as a tiny little hole in the center, there's 4 points that we're going to affix it to. So think of it as a bottom, top, right, and left. So I just pulled my needle through the bottom of the center and pulled it through the pom-pom. Now I'm going to push my needle back through the pom-pom and anchor it to the top center. And I will say each time I have to get that yarn needle through the pom-pom, it is challenging. Please don't be as aggressive as I am being here. You might break your needle. It's a little bit of patience and a little bit of love. You can get that needle through. Now I'm going to put that yarn through the top center. And now that we've gotten that through, it's affixed in 2 points, the bottom and the top center. Now I want to affix it in 2 more points through the sides. So now I'm going to push the needle through one side, push the needle again through the pom-pom, push the needle back down through the pom-pom and through the other side of the center. A little bit of a struggle there, but eventually we get it. And as the very final step, we're going to weave in that yarn. Again, my classic weaving in methodology is 5 stitches one direction and 3 stitches in the reverse direction. Completed with a final knot. Tight, tight, tight. And snip it off. And there you have it. Your beautiful chunky beanie for yourself or for your loved one with a beautiful rib stitch, a bunch of rows of knit stitches, and a pom-pom that was hopefully fun to make. You may have found this fun, sometimes frustrating, but hopefully ultimately you enjoyed this experience, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye!